Hey guys, congratulations, you've made it to the last review video for our Semester 1 final exam. And so this is going to go over what we've done most recently, which is solving equations. And so most of you probably feel pretty good about this since we just finished, but it's always good to get a few more examples. The first one I wanted to go over mostly because I want you to be familiar with some of the directions that you're going to see on the final. So the first set of problems here says to identify the inverse operation needed to solve each equation. So the first thing I want you to notice is your answer should be an operation, right? Either subtraction, addition, multiplication, or division. And again, it's the operation that we need to solve each problem, not the operation that's in the equation. So for example, if I were looking at this first problem, I have the equation 4x equals 12. Right? I know since the 4 and the x are right next to each other, there's no symbol in between, that this is a multiplication problem. Now, since I'm being asked for the operation that I would use to solve the equation, I know that to undo multiplication, I would use division. So that would be my answer here, because I would use division to solve, to get x by itself. Okay, so for number 2, or this one here, I guess it's not numbered, I have x minus 7 equals 11. Right? Since I have subtraction here, I know I need to use the opposite, or addition, to solve. Right? That's what I would use to solve the equation. Okay, here hopefully we recognize by now when we have this written as a fraction, that represents division in our equation. So our inverse operation would be multiplication. And then last but not least, I have x plus 4 here. So to get x by itself, I would do the opposite, which is subtracting. So my inverse operation would be subtraction. So you'll have a couple like that on the final, so I wanted to make sure that those directions were clear. Okay, then the rest of these are just solving like we have been for the last, week or two. Okay, so here I see that I have a fraction, x divided by 4. When I see this here, I know it's division. We know from what we just did up top that the opposite of division is multiplication. Now, I need to multiply by the exact number that x is being divided by. So since x is being divided by 4, I'm going to multiply by 4 on both sides. The nice thing about that now is that these 4's are going to cancel each other out, and we're just going to be left with x. Then I'm going to multiply. I have negative 2 times 4. Those parentheses let me know that I have multiplication. And I get negative 8. Now, since the final is going to be multiple choice, obviously you won't be losing points if you don't check your answer. However, if you don't check, you won't really know if you got it right or not. So we're going to go ahead and check our answer. So my original equation was x over 4 equals negative 2. I know that to check my answer, I need to take my solution, my negative 8, and I'm going to replace the x with that negative 8. So in my check step, I'll have negative 8 over 4. Now, we actually want to use our calculator and make sure this is getting us what we want. So I'm going to type in negative 8 over, use my N over D key, over 4. And I do get a negative 2. Since my negative 2 matches what I wanted, which was a negative 2, I know my answer checks out. Okay. The next couple I'm going to go through pretty quickly because they're basic 1 steps. Here I have x minus 3. I know the opposite of subtracting is adding 3 to both sides. And again, I'm showing my plus sign, so I keep track of my work. Those are going to cancel, and I'm going to get x on this side, and 9 plus 3 equals 12. So I go ahead and check it. My equation was x minus 3 equals 9. We think that x equals 12, so that's what I'm going to substitute for x. So now I have 12 minus 3, and if I put that in my calculator, 12 minus 3 is 9, so I know it's correct. Now, this next one is probably the one that's most commonly missed because people think that they need to add 4 to both sides when they see this negative. However, we need to stop and think. This negative 4 is directly next to the x. There's no plus or minus in between. So that means what I'm really doing here is negative 4 times x. To undo multiplication, I need to divide. So I'm going to divide by a negative 4 on both sides. Now notice, since I had a negative 4 here, I need that to go away. So I need to divide by that exact same number on the bottom. So if this was a negative 4, I need a negative 4 on the bottom as well. Then those will cancel, and I get x equals. Now here we have to be careful with our sign, so it might be worth going back to your calculator. I have a negative 12, and I'm dividing by a negative 4. And that's going to give me a positive 3. So I'm going to check. I have negative 4x equals negative 12. Now here I have multiplication, so parentheses are going to be important. I kind of replaced that x with parentheses, and inside those parentheses I'm going to substitute my value of x, which is 3. And then to make sure I'm keeping track of my signs, I'm going to do negative 4 times 3. Gives me negative 12, which is what I wanted. Okay, moving on to the next one here. Now, here I can see it's a little different because now my x is on the right-hand side. So that's where I want to focus first. Now, I notice I have a positive 5 here. There's no plus, but I know it has to be positive. So if that's a positive 5, to get rid of it, I'm going to need to subtract 5 from both sides. So now my 5's cancel, and I have an x. And now I'm going to put this in just how I see it. I have a negative 12 minus 5. And I get x equals negative 17. So for my check, let's see, I have negative 12 equals 5 plus x. Now, I have 5 plus, now my x is a negative 17. So when I check that, I'm going to put that exactly into my calculator. So 5 plus, then parentheses, a negative 17, and I get negative 12. Okay, my next one here, I have n divided by a negative 8, right? It looks like the negative's out front, but I want us to all be clear that that's the same, really, as doing this. N divided by a negative 8. So now this really isn't any different from this problem, the first one, except that it's a negative on bottom. So if I'm dividing by a negative 8, the way to undo that is to multiply by a negative 8. That number on the bottom has to be the same number, exact same with the same sign, that I multiply by. So I'm going to do that on both sides. These cancel, and I get n equals a negative 16. So to check, I have, let's see, this one's going to be a little interesting. So I have a negative n over 8 equals 2. So my n was a negative 16, and I was dividing that by a negative 8. So in my calculator, if I do a negative 16 divided by a negative 8, I do get a positive 2. Now, something I should mention, right? Usually I put these in boxes, so I should do this. The answer in the box here is the choice I would pick on my multiple choice test. So for example, if I had just done this problem here and it asked me to solve for n, I would look for the choice that said negative 16. All right, a few more here. Now, here's something a little different. Here I have a fraction being multiplied by that variable. When you see a fraction in front of the variable, so I'm going to make a note. When I see a fraction, I think about flipping. fraction goes with flip, because to get rid of this, I'm going to multiply by its reciprocal. And again, the reciprocal has the same sign. So I'm going to multiply by negative 5 over 4 by negative 5 over 4 on this side. These two reciprocals, when I multiply them, I just get 1. So they cancel each other out, and I have d. And then I'm going to go back to my calculator. Negative 5 over 4. Whoops. So let's see if I put that in. 8 times negative 5 over 4 is going to give me a negative 10. So that's what I think my answer is. And I'm going to check it. So I have negative 4/5 times d, and I think that should give me 8. So now I have negative 4/5. I think d is a negative 10, and so I'm going to plug that in and check. So negative 4/5 times a negative 10 gives me a positive 8, and that answer checks out. Again, we won't be looking for this check step. It's just going to help you make sure you got the problem correct. Okay, a few more. This video is getting a little long. Just a few more here. The big deal here is to remember, whenever I have minus a negative, that's the same as x plus 4. So I'm going to rewrite that before I try to solve. Now this is just our regular old one-step problem. I'm going to undo that addition with subtraction. And I get x equals a negative 16. Now if I were to plug that into my original, I would have negative 16 minus a negative 4. There's a lot of negatives, so I'm going to be sure to put this one in my calculator. And I get negative 12, which is what I wanted. So I know x equals negative 16 is my answer. So those were all different types of one steps. The last two are two steps, which is what we ended with on this semester. Now with two steps, the really important thing is once you've found which side of the equation your variable's on, so in this case it's here, we said the first thing you need to do is get rid of the constant. So in this case, my constant is this minus 8. That needs to go first. So I'm going to do that just by adding, doing the opposite like we have been. Those cancel. I have a negative 2x. I know negative 4 plus 8 is going to give me a positive 4. Again, especially with these negatives, make sure you're using your calculator to at least check so you're not making sign errors. Now I have a multiplication problem, so I'm going to undo that by dividing. And I'm going to get x equals negative 2. And of course, with these two steps, we're still going to check our answers. So I can do a check. I have negative 2x minus 8, and I'm hoping I get negative 4. So I copy my negative 2. Since this is multiplication, I'm going to use parentheses and put in that answer, which is negative 2, subtract 8, and then I'm just going to type this whole thing into my calculator. So I have negative 2 times negative 2 minus 8 gives me a negative 4, and I can't see here. Yep, that's what we wanted. So it checks out. Okay, last but not least, another two-step. And again, I find the side of the side of the equation that has x, and I know I need to get rid of the constant, the number by itself, first. So this happens to be another subtraction. So to undo that, I'm going to add 5. So those cancel. I have x over 2 equals a negative 2. Now, since this is x divided by 2, I need to multiply to get rid of that on the bottom, which is going to give me x equals a negative 4. So when I go to check my answer now, my equation was x over 2 minus 5 equals a negative 7. I think x is negative 4, so I replace the x with the negative 4. Minus 5. And again, I'm going to use my calculator. I'm not just going to assume that this is correct. I'm going to actually use my calculator to check. So I have a negative 4 over 2 minus 5, and I get -7. All right, congratulations, you've made it through all the review videos. So hopefully you've been keeping up with all the multiple choice practice. You have some more multiple choice practice for this section, and that covers the whole semester. Good luck studying.